Hey guys, and welcome to our episode today on the Pathway Show. And with me today, I have Coach Noah Revoy, who is an arms dealer of the soul, or for the soul. I welcome you, Noah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Tell me, Noah, who are you for the
Well,
listeners?
well,
Introduce yourself.
I'm 45 years old. I'm a married man with three children. Been married for over 20 years now, and I live in Portugal. And I've been helping people almost my entire life. When I was 2 years old, my family decided that I should be a minister, and so I started to receive training in public speaking, in It was essentially psychology and philosophy as well, so that I could understand people better, how to read them, how to understand their emotional states, and then how to bring them comfort and help. The name Noah means comfort, and it means my middle name is Jonathan, so it means comfort from God. And so my parents wanted me to be able to bring comfort from God to people. And so I was trained to be a minister, and I grew up in a church that was very big into preaching and teaching people about the Bible. So I learned a lot about it from that time period. But I also recognized that the advice that was being given to people about relationships and even sometimes about their career was not sufficient. So, in an ideal world, the very simple advice that's in the Bible about relationships would be enough. But in our modern world, there needed to be some additions to that, because the advice in the Bible works very well for people who are well trained to be spouses, as most of our ancestors would have been. That was a part of culture, as you learned to be a husband or a wife from childhood, because everyone was expected to get married. And nowadays people aren't. And so I had to start learning how relationships work and what were people missing that they needed to make them work. And this made me very effective at counseling married people, so that even in my late teen years, I wasn't married, of course, and people were coming to me for advice on this. And I'd done this all my life while I worked at other jobs. And when my wife got pregnant, uh, so many people were asking for help that I said to them, I don't have time for this anymore. I need to work more to take care of my wife and kids. And people started wanting to pay me for it. And it turned into a career. So I kind of fell into the career. I didn't start out saying, I think I should be a coach. I was a little reluctant. My clients actually had to convince me to do it. And that was an interesting experience with your clients. You really demonstrate that gratitude for what you're doing, that they're willing to pay for it. So I really enjoyed that.
What is your life mission, or what is your mission as a coach?
I want to build a world, or help people to build the world that I want my children to live in. I can raise my children as well as I possibly can, and they can be fantastic. And then they have to go out into a world where they have to find people to work with, and they have to find a spouse, and they have to find a community to raise their children in. And I just don't see a place where I want my kids raising my grandkids. And I see it as my responsibility to contribute towards creating that world. And I don't even expect that it will be completely done in my lifetime. I think this is an intergenerational task. But I want to create that place where I would be happy to have my children raising my grandchildren. And I want them to be surrounded by people who are also the kind of people I'd want to be around my grandchildren. And so that is the driving force behind it. It's the fathering instinct. Instead of just fathering my children, it's how do you father the entire world? And so this is why I don't just coach. I also talk publicly about what I'm doing, and I post publicly about it so that I can help to influence even more people.
What do you think is the greatest struggle of this generation? Because you talk about intergenerational uh, job or task. Part of your mission is to contribute to one generation in order for it to be able to father or mother the next generation. What do you think, in your experience, when you work with people? You have done so for a very long time. In your experience, what's the biggest struggle? What's the biggest blocks that we may have in our lives that are keeping us from becoming the good fathers, the good mothers, the good parents?
Back when governments instituted mandatory public school, we took children away from the influence of their parents, and we put them under the influence of the state. And the state is a machine. It doesn't really care about us as individuals, and it only cares about extraction of taxes, because that's what it eats. It's like an animal. It eats those taxes. It needs to get them out. It doesn't care about if we're a good mother or father. And we've had, no matter where you are in the world, at least 150 years of government education mandated for young people. And so what's happened is we've gone away from constantly learning with our parents to now learning with people who don't have an interest that's truly aligned with our own. And so we don't get a chance to see how our dad interacts with our mom during the day. And even worse than that, we took the fathers out, we stuck them in a factory. We took the mothers out, we stuck her in an office. And so the entire family is separated. And the way that we learn to be a good mother or good father is by observing our parents parenting us, and even more important, observing them parenting our siblings, because it gives us just enough distance that we can be a little less emotional about it and we can really pick up what's going on. And we also used to live in communities where there was no youngest or oldest child. You might be the youngest from your parents, or the oldest from your parents, but then you have older cousins. And so there was this unbroken line of babies, you could say. It's a chain of passed on wisdom. So you always had an older, close in age, older sibling to see, okay, I see he's going in that direction and the family's giving him this advice, and that's how it's turning out. And then I see my younger siblings and how dad is guiding them and mom is guiding them. And we'd learn from this. And now we're not learning any of that. We're so isolated and fragmented. There are young ladies that grow up, and I'm coaching them, and I say to them, they're concerned about how good a mother they're going to be. And I ask them, when's the last time you held a baby? I've never held a baby. How could you grow up and never hold a baby? Did you have any younger relatives? Yeah, but I was always afraid. And then you have my great grandmother, who explains to me that by the time she was 16, she could manage an entire household, and she'd helped her mother give birth to 4 or 5 kids. And that difference over a short period of time has led to us just not getting the information. And if it doesn't pass from father to son and a mother to daughter, one generation, then there's no one to explain it to the next generation, even if they want to be closer with them. So we bring our kids home when we want to do homeschooling, or we want to just spend more time with them, but we don't have anything to teach them because we weren't taught. And we get stuck as an entire society that way. And it makes us very susceptible to bad ideas and to what I would call junk food parenting. It kind of works. It kind of fulfills the need, but the long-term consequences are unhealthy. And that's where we're stuck nowadays. And we have to relearn the wisdom that we had from the Stone Age up until the 1850s, 60s, 70s, when the school was introduced. We have to relearn that ancestral wisdom and apply it in a modern context.
Do you think that you're talking about the state in a general term, in all states, right? And I agree with you to one extent that being separated from your parents, it's not the ideal. It's not how we evolutionarily evolved, right?
Yeah.
It's not until, like you said, 150 years ago, we did grow up on a farm, or we grew up with our parents, and we were always in relation to the people closest to us, right? In our families or extended families. There's a saying that it takes a village to bring up a child, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
adage, that's wisdom that comes from the past, and I think there's some wisdom in that for sure. And I think also that isolation and loneliness is a big issue in our society today. But at the same time, there is something I think that there's something good with schools. If you look at, for example, I have experience teaching. I've been the chairman of my children's preschool for several years. So I'm well acquainted with what's written in the curriculum. And the curriculum is very, very, very attuned to the needs of the children, to their development, to their needs. both emotional needs, their need for creativity, for exploration, for relationships. So, in one sense, I think the issue is not the school in and of itself. The issue is that there are too few adults in schools in
That's
relation
part
to
of it. Yes,
kids. Yes.
absolutely.
So, for example, for my in my child's preschool, there's one teacher per 4 to 5 kids. My children, they attach to the teachers. They become like their parents when they're there. They are secure with them, and they feel safe with them. And in the school, they learn things like how to grow a garden. They learn things such as, how to paint. They use creativity. They learn about boundaries. They learn about their own needs. They learn to express their emotions very well. They learn how to be with other children as well. Everything under the supervision and under the guidance of teachers that are well attuned and well regulated themselves, hopefully. And this is ideal. And this is actually the school that my child goes to. But then something happens when you go to first grade or to to kindergarten, and then you all of a sudden you have my child. She's like in a class with 24 other students, and there's one teacher, and they have an assistant teacher in the classroom too. So there are two adults per 12 kids, and then you expect them to be able to fit into the system and everything. But still, I think the curriculum in and of itself, there are pros and there are cons. They learn a lot of things, but I think that essentially that the idea of the village where you're close to your family and so on, uh, it's a good idea. But I think that the extension is that there's a school, and that school is part of the village and the family. It's not no longer just the family and so on. And I think the issue, if I were to make changes, because I don't think it's possible to go back to a society that we have pre
We don't have
1850.
the knowledge or the stability to go back to that.
No, exactly. So everything is dependent on having a school system with with all the information that you learn and everything that you train yourself in that sense. So I think that if I personally were to make a change, it would be more adults in school, more regulated adults that are present in school in the classroom, that are able to actually meet the kids.
And I think one of the best ways to do that is there's one other aspect is they're in school, I think, too many hours. And it's too much structured time. Children need, especially the younger children, need some unstructured time. Go and just do what you like for a few hours. And
Yeah,
you'll see this during the summer. They find a way to fill their day with stuff when they're not in school. And if you had a morning cohort and an afternoon cohort, you could have the same amount of employees we have now with the same cost to the education, but we'd have twice as many adults per kid while they were in the classroom. And that would essentially be like doubling the number of employees. And it would also allow children to have more time for lower intensity stuff, because a lot of times that play on their own is low intensity, and it's where they're digesting the things they've learned. So we don't just take things in, we have to then sort them and figure out where they go so they can get out of short-term memory and get into that tree of knowledge that builds up inside
yeah,
of us. Jean Piaget talks about the the structure of knowledge being like a tree, and you have to connect the new thing you learn onto a branch of that tree, or you'll forget it. If it's disconnected, you will forget it. And so often children have to build that connection, even if we're explicit in how it's connected. They then have to rebuild it in their mind in order for it to be a part of their permanent understanding of the world. That's a thing you do in silence.
yeah,
You do that in quiet while you're thinking, often while you're doing something unrelated. And so I'll do that. I'll read a book that I know has information that I'm going to be able to apply in my coaching. And then I will just go for a walk or do something that's brainless type of activity. And while I'm walking, all of a sudden I'll have, aha, that's how I'm going to use it. And it kind of comes to me. What was happening? I was digesting it. And I can't force that process. It just happens as it happens. And I think we overburden children with things to do nowadays. They're super busy. And that leaves them with very little emotional and intellectual digestion time. And so they're not really attaching the knowledge in a proper way. Maybe they memorize it. Especially in the older grades, I call it educational bulimia. They memorize things, they puke it up on a test, and then they forget it. And it's not good for the kid. It just stresses them out, and it doesn't reward learning. It rewards short-term memorization, and that's a skill, but it's not really the skill we want to be inculcating in the children.
Absolutely. And I think I fully agree with you that the children need a lot of downtime
Mm-hmm.
to play. And the best type of learning is done through play. If you
Mm-hmm.
can do, and it's very difficult to teach all the subjects that we have in school system through play. It requires a completely different training of the teacher to be able to do all of that. How do you teach math, which you can do actually, in a completely different way, but it's very, very difficult. And I don't know of any school that's able to do that fully. Obviously, you have some school systems like Montessori and, some other philosophies in schools that follow such philosophies and so on. But I find it to be very difficult. But I fully agree with you that kids do need a lot of downtime, much less structured time than we think that they actually need. Because I think in our society, we may be so intended on helping our kids to succeed, whatever that means. So we need to tell them, structure every waking hour almost, so that they will be prepared for the best colleges and the best jobs and anything. But we forget often about the connection, about the emotional regulation, about the maturity that happens when they're actually simply in your presence, right? And the necessary connection. So, what do you think, like, in your experience in working with your client and all, being a father yourself and a husband, what happens to a child who is disconnected in this way, grows up in this society? Like, what happens to the person when he becomes an adult?
So what happens is, as they're going along, they keep getting new stages of development, which require them to take on new responsibilities. And ideally, it's not that you take on one responsibility before you learn how to do it. It's a little bit of each. It's a cycle. So I take on a little bit of that responsibility, and now I need to learn some new methods to cope with the stress of the responsibility, but also how to actually discharge the responsibility correctly. And it's bit by bit, little tiny cycles. And the smaller and faster the cycle, the better the kid will learn. It's smoother. Little failures, lots of little failures are a lot easier to deal with than occasional massive failures. And so the kid's learning, and then something happens and that gets derailed. And the responsibilities keep stacking up. Like if you're 25 years old, you're going to be expected to act like an adult. It doesn't matter if you still have 12-year-old coping skills or not. The work will get poured on you. And most people won't have a lot of pity for you. They'll be, well, just grow up, But you can't, because you can't just command yourself to suddenly have coping skills. You have to learn them, and you have to learn them from someone. And if you don't have them, if you're sufficiently behind, you may not even recognize that that's your problem. You might just think there's something inherently wrong with you, which is very demoralizing. And so the people that I'm working with, very often, they're incredibly intelligent, really successful in some areas of life, but then in other areas they have childish coping skills. And I had a lady, a very nice lady in her mid-30s, and she says to me, anything I want at work, I get. She says, I know how to make it work. I can make people money. There isn't a problem I can't solve at work. There, I feel really empowered and in charge. But I haven't the ability to maintain relationships with people, not just men, but like relationships in general. And she says, I apply the same skills I use at work to be successful in my romantic relationships, and it doesn't work. And of course, it's a completely different skill set. It's a different skill set, different set of objectives, and different way of pleasing people. You don't need to like the people you go to work with. You just need to be able to get along with them. But you can't apply that to romantic relationships. You don't need chemistry with the people you work with. Probably better you don't have any chemistry with them. But you need chemistry with the people that you're going to have a romantic relationship with. And so she's applying her very adult and mature business working skills, coping skills, but to an area where she doesn't have the skills. She's trying to fill that gap. And so when you explain this to people that, you never saw, oh, where are you stuck? And I find out they're stuck at about 12-year-old. When did your parents divorce? When I was 12. So then you stopped seeing at that point how relationships work. Even a bad example is sometimes better than no example. So you stop seeing how it worked. And that's why you're stuck back there. Have you seen any good relationships you could learn from? No. Because what happens is divorced people tend to hang out with other divorced people. And so the kids don't have a chance to learn from someone else. And if you don't have relatives that are married or grandparents or somebody, you're not learning these skills. And so I have to then teach them the skills in a kind of bookish academic way. And then I get them to go and experience it. Go try this. A really common one is that most men try to talk to women the same way they talk to men. And so they see something in their wife that needs to be changed. And they're so blunt and aggressive about it. I'm a guy, I really like other guys that come to me and say, you're wrong and this needs to be fixed and you need to get it done now. Like, okay, thank you. Thank you for the feedback, Or some, I have friends in my social circle that have very blunt social graces. And I like it because I know exactly where I stand with them. If they talk to a woman like that, she would find it offensive because it doesn't show any empathy. And I'm okay with that because I just want to get things done. And I know they do care. But for the women, you have to show you care. It's not just enough for them to know it. You have to demonstrate it. And so you have to speak with them differently. You have to be more gentle, just like you wouldn't roughhouse with you roughhouse with a guy friend, and you wouldn't do that in the same way with your wife. You'd break her because she's smaller than you. So you have to also adjust the way that you speak with her as well. And you have to speak with her with more love and more gentleness. And pretty much every culture in history recognized this, and somehow we've completely forgotten.
Why do you think we've forgotten?
We were sold a lie that men and women were equal, interchangeable, fungible units of financial production, rather than human beings. And that makes us view each other in inaccurate ways. We're unwilling to accept that we think differently, that we feel differently, and that we have different needs. And women bought into this as well. So they're often not treating themselves with enough empathy. They're trying to treat themselves like men. And you'll see this there's a big problem with corporate burnout with women in their 30s because they've been trying to work the way men work in this harsh, hyper-competitive, hyper-aggressive market where that's just not really what they want to do. And it doesn't truly appeal to their desire to be connected with other people and to have that emotional, empathetic connections. And so they end up burning out in their 30s, and they're burning out emotionally. They still have energy to do stuff. They just don't want to go into that environment anymore. Whereas men in that environment, it actually depends on the man, of course, it can make us stronger and we can thrive in it. Lots of men like combative environments. I like to argue. It's fun. I prefer to argue with people I know actually care about me. Otherwise, I don't think it's much of a point. But I never argue with my wife. Never fight with my wife. I never am in competition with my wife because that would damage the bond in the relationship we have. Whereas I can do that with my friends and it strengthens the relationship with my male friends. And as long as we fail to recognize basic biological, psychological, and emotional differences, we're going to be unable to treat the other sex appropriately. We're not going to be successful with them.
So when I listen to you, I can hear some of my audience, they would say, coming from a sociological perspective, let's say all the work that the women's movement have done, in the past 80 years or so, even more, 100 years to some extent, that they have made visible that society is unequal. Women are paid less for the similar work or the same work even as men are. doing. You argue, you say that we have forgotten that we are different. We're not the same. You say we're not equal.
We're equal
Doesn't
before the law. So we're equal in that it's equal value as humans, and we're equal before the law and how we should be treated.
yeah.
But we're not equal in that we produce the same types of values. For example, uh, it's more likely that women are to be appreciated for appearance than men. So when a woman says a man is attractive, very often she's not referring as much to his appearance as to his behavior. Whereas men will look at a picture of a woman and completely judge by the appearance. And this isn't an issue of is this right or is this wrong. First, we must accept reality, and then we can decide whether it's right or wrong. But that's what
But the
the
question,
reality of the situation is.
but the question here is how you describe reality
Hmm.
and what is true about reality, because it's not. This is your because are women, for example, they're different, but how can we say that they are generally different? Or is
Yes,
it the case that
it's not of course every
is
single
it the
one.
case that there are some women that actually like the blunt conversations? I'll have a blunt conversation
Yes.
with my sisters,
Yes.
and they would appreciate me being very honest with them, and they don't like,
Yes.
being what you described earlier on, and this it's almost as if you want to get away from a societal image maybe of what equality is seen, but
What it
maybe
what it is that there's male and female cognition, but some men have feminine cognition. That means they think their thought patterns are closer to the thought patterns of women, and some women have male cognition. So I would say about a third of men have female cognition, and sometimes they get that changes as they get older, and they shift over it with more responsibility because they have to. Um, and I would say maybe 5 to 10% of women globally have male cognition. It's more common in if you get past the Hagenal line in Northern Europe. So it's like the midway line between North and South Europe. And the reason is for a very long time, we intentionally, the men of Europe intentionally preferred women with more masculine cognition because they would make a better partner rather than someone you had to take care of. And we are in a harsh condition of survival, of constant conflict, low level conflict, and we were so spread out that there was no ability to concentrate power for protection or security. And so we had to rely on our women. We had to say, we're going to go away for 3 weeks to, fight a tribe down there, and you got to hold down the fort while we're gone. And so a few thousand years of that selection, we have a much higher level of cognitively masculine women. And this is probably why, so they're cognitively masculine, they're still physically women. And so being in their masculine for long periods of time, they can do it, but they're going to pay a cost. Men pay the cost of dying 5 years younger. And women will sacrifice health as well if they're in that highly competitive state. I even suggest for men that sometimes you just need to chill out, just stop thinking, stop problem solving, stop being irrational. Stop being
yeah.
rational and just chill out, because you're going to kill yourself if you're always trying to be hyper masculine all the time. And we pay a different level of price for it because we have all this extra testosterone. It makes it easier for us to do that and less costly, but everyone pays a cost for being in that environment. On the other hand, if nobody's in that hyper competitive mindset, it's very hard to move society forward and to produce the things we need to survive and to deal with threats. So it has to be a balance. We have to balance it. And in almost all religions, especially the pre-Christian ones, the latest god, the newer gods, they were gods that combined both the masculine and feminine cognition. So you'll see in the Greek, Apollo and Artemis, they're some aspects of the opposite gender. And what that's saying is they have mastered the masculine, but they also can use the feminine as well, or vice versa, masculine to feminine, but they can also use the masculine cognition when necessary. And in the Germanic, Woden eventually learned the feminine magic. And so that became both his ability to do both things. Even Jesus Christ in Christianity is a highly empathetic man, which
Yeah.
would have been considered very unusual in his time. Men didn't tend to be generally high levels of empathy in men in high conflict cultures like the Middle East is not common. But he was highly empathetic, and he combined the masculinity with the feminine skills as well. And that is what we want to look for to be fully developed. First you have to work on the skill set that is easiest for you, and then implement the other things as well. Gives you a lot more depth as a person and ability to deal with situations that you can't deal with if you only have one of those skill sets.
So when you work with your clients and you talk about these things and they come to you with issues such as, the relationship, for example, what does it look like to work with you in a container?
So usually I say to them, it's like going to the doctor. Tell me what hurts. And I emphasize with my clients that they're not broken. There's nothing wrong with them. They're underdeveloped. And so we're going to take them wherever they are now, and we'll meet them there. And where it's hurting is where you haven't yet finished your development. And so we're going to look for those places. Tell me where it's hurting. Why do you think that's hurting? What is the change state you want to see in your life? So you're getting this result, but what's the result you'd like to get? And sometimes I say to them, okay, that's very far from where you are. What's an intermediate step you'd like to take? So if you're single and you want to be married with kids, the intermediate step is we got to get you better at meeting the opposite sex and interacting with them, and picking someone that's compatible with your way of operating. And so it's intermediate steps, and we start working their way to that. And it's not about telling them what to do. It's about helping them develop the skill set they need to make it work, and removing whatever's blocking them. And this is what hypnotism works well for. There's a lot of people who they know what to do. Every time they try to do it, they get sweaty and hyperventilate, and there's some anxiety in their body, and they're stressed and they don't know why. I wanted to speak to that girl, but then I was about to talk to her and I couldn't speak. I don't know what happened. What would you have told her? Anything he tells me, yeah, that would have worked. That would have been great. If she was interested in you, she would have said yes. Yeah, I know, but I couldn't do it. Okay, so there's something blocking them. And so we dig into that. What's blocking you? What belief do you have about yourself or women, or just the same way that some women are deeply distrustful of men. There's lots of men that are deeply distrustful of women. And how do you speak to someone that you're distrustful of? How do you approach them and ask them for something as intimate as going on a date? Something where you're a little bit vulnerable because you're exposing yourself. And so let's work on those things. Let's fix those underlying programming. And in some cases, it's a matter of just completely removing that blockage. You can do that through, a lot of times the blockage is in the body. It's not even a psychological problem. I've had clients that completely were able to change their their emotional behavior by just learning to relax their body. Just breathe. I say that as I'm a little bit congested, but just breathe. Some deep breaths, let your shoulders fall, relax, and now try to do it. Well, it's easy now. Okay, so did you have a psychological block? Or were you simply too physically tense to think correctly and be able to do the thing you wanted to do?
Well, it depends on what you mean by psychology. I would argue that psychology is not only about the brain,
Yes.
the mind,
Yes.
the body is connected as part of the nervous system. So what you essentially do when you take a deep breath is to calm down. You're down regulating. You're from a fight or flight situation kind of thing to a more regulated state, and you're more relaxed then, and then become more sociable and so on.
Exactly.
So yeah. So you work with people who are trying to find relationships or learn the skill sets of how to be with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
What about, like, in your experience, what about people that are already married, for example, maybe they have children and they have difficulties? Do you
Yeah,
work with
so
people like that as well?
Yeah, so I have a lot of clients that are very far along in their marriage, and they got 10-year-old kids, maybe teenagers, and things were okay for a while, and now they're starting to have problems, and they're trying to figure out what changed. A lot of times nothing changed. There was problems there all along. It's just over time, if you ignore a problem, it gets worse. And if you and your spouse are not headed in the same direction, you either collide. You just think about it: two parallel lines. Two
Yeah.
parallel lines, you're going to be okay. If you're tilted in, you're going to collide with each other, so you're going to have conflict. If you're tilted outwards, you're going to separate from each other, and maybe you're not really any big emotional explosion, but you just don't want to be around them anymore. And I think that's what happens with most couples. Actually, is they just separate emotionally. Maybe they live together, but they're emotionally and physically separated. And so the idea is to help you realign yourselves and to figure out what you can do to continue to exert attraction on your spouse. A lot of people understand that you're not going to get married if you can't attract someone, but you won't stay married if you can't keep attracting that person, because entropy enters into everything, including relationships. And if you're not continuing to build attraction and energy, you're going to slowly burn it up, and very quickly sometimes when you have kids. Lots of couples, everything is fine until they have kids, and that added responsibility, they don't have the coping skills for it. And they'll blame the kids, or they'll blame the increased stress or the lack of sleep. Anyone who has kids knows about the lack of sleep. It could drive you just about insane.
Yeah.
But it's not the kids, and it's not the lack of sleep. It's just that you don't have the skills you need for that part of your life yet. And there are things you can learn. And so I help people learning those skills. And it has to be specific to the individual, because the way you help, say, someone who's high in neuroticism to deal with a crying baby is different than the way you help a person who is low in neuroticism but maybe high in conscientiousness. I know lots of high conscientiousness mothers, for example, that over baby their kids because they want to make sure they're doing it right. So they go too far. They're getting them too many, something as simple as they're giving them a whole load of vitamin supplements and other things like this that might be too much, just because they want it to be perfect. So you're going to give a different advice to that person than someone who is high in neuroticism, who's fear driven. And rather than trying to change the person, you might say, well, maybe if you were less neurotic, it would be better. Maybe it would be, but maybe it would just teach you how to cope with being so neurotic and how to turn that into energy you can use to help your children, rather than energy that's burning you up inside.
What
So
do
I
you
work
do
with
with
my
couples that have a lot of high conflict? Yeah, your
yeah
attraction is important, but
yeah
people that do have conflicts, often you can have attraction and still have conflict. You
yeah.
fight a
So
lot and so.
high conflict comes from high emotional energy. Two people who don't care about each other aren't going to have conflict. I don't care. Do whatever you want. I don't care. Do whatever you want. Okay. You can kind of get along. I've actually met couples that were kind of like that, and it's not a very satisfying relationship, but there's no fighting. If there's high conflict, there's high emotional energy. Now, as long as that hasn't turned into bitterness and resentment, then what you try to do is you transmute that conflict energy into something productive. So instead of arguing with your wife, she expresses her needs or her wants or desires, in maybe she does it in some very aggressive way, and because she's upset, she's angry. And instead of setting yourself up as, okay, now we're going to have a fight, you know, and of course, then now you're on opposite sides of the opposite teams. You're going to fight with each other. Instead, you physically and emotionally position yourself in a way where we're together against the problem. Hi, I really see your this is causing you a lot of stress, and yeah, this is really bothering you. Tell me more. And you show empathy, and you want to listen to her and what she has to say, and you let her pour it all out until all of her emotional energy about the subject has been poured out. And that can take a while if you haven't been listening for some years, because she's got to get all that built up, pent up. It might take a few conversations worth to get all that energy out. And while you're doing that, you're empathetic and you're curious. And you're curious about why is she so angry about that? Or why is she so hurt? Or what it is that's bothering her. And you want her to let you know. So do you have any insights into why you felt that way or why you reacted that way? Or here's a great example. We were going to have our twins, our second group of kids. And my wife says, I need more help around the house. So I'd been really buckling down and working, making money. And she said, I need more help around the house. You need to do, maybe you do this or that. She's giving suggestions. And I said, I see that you feel very stressed out about this. And you're worried that with the twins coming, you're not going to be able to keep the house tidy. And that's a completely legitimate concern. I'm worried about overstressing you as well and overburdening you. I don't have any time to do those things you suggested, but I'm not saying that you're going to have to do them on your own. Let's be creative and come up with a solution that makes you happy and makes you secure and comfortable, but that also doesn't impinge my ability to continue making enough money for us to live on. And so we brainstormed this, and I had already come up with the idea that we probably needed a maid, but we brainstormed this and I gently introduced that idea to her. And she says, well, as long as I pick the person, I don't have a problem with that. This way she can pick someone she feels comfortable messing with her stuff. And so she picked a maid, and it worked great. And actually, I just heard my maid come in the door a few minutes ago. So it ended up solving her problem in a way where we were both happy with it. But if I had said, no, I'm not going to help out, I'm not doing anything. You're a woman, you clean the house, I'm a man, I do the work. How would that conversation have gone? And it's not that I would have been technically wrong to say those things. It would have been emotionally and empathetically wrong. It would have been an incorrect approach to deal with her. And my wife is, in general, a more cognitively masculine type of woman. She's able to be very rational, very direct, and compared to other women, she's always had this issue where she was so much more direct than them that it would cause conflict. And so I can be more direct with her than normal. And yet I recognize that I get an even better result if I'm gentle with her. And so I teach guys how to do that. And I teach women the opposite, like how to be more direct with their husbands.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is that essentially where you work on helping couples to be more attuned to the needs of the other.
Yes.
And to be able to express them and find a common ground to stand on.
Yeah.
And I think that emotional regulation is extremely important. A person who I come from a position where I work a lot with attachment theory and what goes on, how you're formed, your primary attachment style is very much, formed in your early childhood, depending on how your primary caretakers took care of you and how, if you felt secure or not, if your needs were met or not. So you can either have a secure attachment, avoidant, or anxious attachment style, or disorganized in one sense. And that's going to actually inform the way you interact with other human beings, even as an adult. A person who is unable to emotionally regulate will have difficulties also communicating with other human beings because they will be unable to actually deal with their own discomfort. Because they need, for example, if they're anxious, they need the constant validation of the partner in order to feel secure in themselves. And even when they get it, they don't really find they're not really secure. And the avoidant person doesn't need so much because they're just avoiding their own needs. They're not even aware of what they have because they think that they're independent and so on. Whereas if you're secure, you realize that there's conflict here, there is something dangerous here, quote unquote, dangerous, but uncomfortable, and I'm able to deal with this together with you. And I can express my needs, I can talk to you, I can listen to you, and so on. So I think that attunement is important, but I also think that emotional regulation is highly critical to have a thriving relationship with another human being. For sure.
Absolutely. And I think to a large extent, we can help our spouse to improve their emotional regulation by talking to, if you notice, the way I'm encouraging people to talk is in a way that helps the other person to develop their regulation. So I'm helping them to think through the problem and to stay calm. And when you do that often enough, like at this point, after 20 years of marriage, most of the time my wife doesn't need to ask me what I think about things, because we've had these conversations so often. She can have my thoughts in her head and go, he'd probably say this and that and the other thing. And so then she can kind of figure it out on her own. And
Yeah.
they internalize the way of doing things, that she internalized my way of doing things. This is similar to how you raise children as well, is you model the problem solving skills with them by talking them through them. And simply by us as parents staying calm, it helps the children to stay calm. And
Yeah.
when they're older, I like to explain the like control. I actually taught my kids, before they could speak, how to do controlled breathing to reduce pain and stress. So my youngest one, I started with him, and he had bad colic. So my wife had mastitis, and because of that, it gave him bad colic. And so I would hold him against my chest, directly against my chest skin. And I would take a
Hmm.
deep breath in, and I go, breathe in, breathe out. And so he'd be in that kind of panic crying stage, and he'd slowly
Yeah.
start to slow down, and then he would breathe right. Now, I've seen him now, he stubs his toe and immediately goes into controlled breathing so that he doesn't, scream about it. And
Yeah.
it's just what he does. I've seen him at kickboxing. He gets hit in the face, and I can see him controlling his breathing, so that, because they're not supposed to hit each other in the face at this age, so that he doesn't get angry and hit the other kid back. And if you can control your breathing, you can control your heart rate, you can control your emotions.
Yeah. Essentially, I think that especially for children, I mean, their nervous system is not developed yet, so they depend on, hopefully, mature parents who are able to regulate their nervous system to teach them how to regulate their own nervous system. I think that's a very important part of the attachment relationship with your primary caretaker. And if you marry, if you have, if you don't have a secure attachment style like growing up, and if you marry somebody or are in relationship with somebody who is actually more regulated, has a regulated nervous system, you would certainly be
Yes.
benefit from that, because that person will help you to reparent you. That's
Yes.
what you're doing right now. Also, I was having a conversation with a psychologist like a month ago, and we were saying that, how we are actually reparenting each other in this conversation. With every conversation, we're able to help each other to see different perspectives on ourselves and get new insights in our lives and grow in awareness. And that's part of the healing journey, I think.
Absolutely. You mentioned part of the reason you're asking before, the question of why are we in this situation in society? And part of it is that these conversations people used to have, which was a primary form of entertainment outside of work, we now watch TV
Yeah.
and or surf social media. And so we're not getting that constant exposure to other people where we can help each other. And they don't have to be way ahead of us to help us. They just need to be a little ahead of us in one thing, and maybe we're ahead in another thing, and we trade and we exchange benefits to each other. And sometimes it's just a matter of reflecting. I've helped people who are older than me and wiser and more mature than me to solve problems, because I understand how to solve problems and I can reflect back to them. And it's really them that answers their own question. It's just I help facilitate them in that answering process. Well, we don't do that anymore. We watch entertainment and we keep our mind busy with stuff. So we're not having any time to self reflect, and we're not having any time to speak with other people and get their reflection of what we're doing. And we're really missing out on that. That's, my great grandmother used to say, the primary thing they did when they weren't busy was converse. So she'd get together with her sisters and sisters-in-law, and they'd all be chatting it up. And she said, we had loads of time to do that. We had lots of time to talk and converse. She says, today, nobody's got any time for each other. And yet you have all of these ease of life things that we didn't have. So I didn't have a dishwasher. I didn't have a clothes washing machine. My mom had 16 kids. She had none of these things, and she had more time to talk with her sister than we have today to talk with each other. And it was because they didn't have so much entertainment, they made the time for
Yeah.
that socialization. We're not socialized enough in modern society. We're too isolated. And
Yeah.
so we're not fixing the problems we have. We're just holding on to them.
What's the anti-manipulation book that you have
Yeah.
that
So
you're
that's a
reading?
book that I wrote. It says Become Immune to Manipulation. And I wrote that book a little over a year ago, finished it or published it. And what I was looking at is as a subset of all the things that I teach, what's the one thing that I could put in a book that would have a massive benefit to society? And I decided that, if we can't manipulate each other, then we're forced to deal honestly and truthfully with each other. And simply speaking the truth will begin the process of resolving all these other problems, whatever the problem happens to be. And so I thought, if I can inoculate people, this is also the time when everyone was getting vaccinated. So if I can inoculate people, give them kind of an immunity to manipulation through a book, that will ripple out into the world. Because if you're immune to manipulation, the people around you have to deal honestly with you, which means they're going to start to see the benefits of honest communication and frank communication, and they're more likely to start demanding that in their life, and it just ripples out. And so I wrote this book with the help of Joshua Lysick, because when I write, the way I was trained and educated, I'm writing at a level that's not publishable. It's more like a PhD thesis or something like this. It's not publishable. And so not only did he help me write the book, he really taught me how to write better and for the public. And it was worth a lot more than the ghostwriting actual cost was. The experience itself was fantastic. And, I bought his book when it came out, and it was just what he taught me and others put into a book form. But I wrote this book to systematize manipulation. So people say, I think I'm being manipulated. Actually, most people will say, I feel like I'm being manipulated. And that's because manipulation is social and emotional warfare. So it's using our natural need for socialization and acceptance of the group and our natural emotional instincts against us. Just turning those things against us. And I use those things to turn them on the favor of the client. So I use their emotions in a positive way, while the manipulator used them in a negative way. And so I go through exactly how that works. What are the different tactics that manipulators use? In
Yeah.
this way, when you can, like a checklist, is that person gossiping about me? Are they undermining my sense of self? And you can go through the whole list. Are they psychologizing me? Oh, you're crazy. Are they gaslighting me? It's a list of things. And if they're doing 2 or 3 of these things, they're manipulating me. Okay, what do I do about it? And it's important that we have a method to help correct other people's behavior towards us without destroying the relationship. Because if we kicked all the manipulators out of our life, we'd be alone. Because most people are using some level of manipulation on each other.
We probably kick ourselves out of our lives.
Yes. Well, I started in the book, I said all manipulation starts as self-manipulation.
Yeah.
And we manipulate ourselves into accepting other people's manipulation and into a myriad of other things. And we have to first reestablish that relationship with ourselves. And that sometimes means changing what we're doing, because we realize I'm only doing this because I manipulated myself into it. And from there, we won't accept it in other people as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. So you mentioned psychologizing, gaslighting, gossiping. What are some of the other tactics that you mentioned in the book, and what are some of the counter tactics, so to speak? I understand counter tactic as boundaries that you set, obviously, but you can set boundaries in different ways.
Yeah, so here's an example. One of them is shaming. And so if I go to someone, a friend, and I say, you did this thing and it was really hurtful, and they're ashamed of it, I didn't shame them. I'm exposing to them that I've been hurt, and they naturally feel shame about it. Okay, so they're doing this to themselves because it's healthy and natural to have shame over shameful conduct. But if I say to you, I don't like your opinion, and you should be ashamed of having that opinion, I'm shaming you for it. And what I'm doing is I'm saying, stop having that opinion, not because it's wrong, but because I will socially disapprove of you until I do. And if my social disapproval isn't enough, I'm going to, and this is another tactic, rallying, I'm going to get everybody else that's my friends around here, and we're all going to wag our fingers at you and shame you. And then see how you like it. And we see this a lot in society. Of the governments do it. A lot of marketing is highly manipulative. Most marketing is highly
Oh,
manipulative. It's
sure.
not designed to help us make an informed choice. It's designed to make us feel ashamed and stupid if we don't choose their product or their political solution. And the counter to that is to live a life where you have nothing to be ashamed of. And so there's nowhere that they can make you feel bad. If you feel ashamed of something you're doing in life, all they have to do is figure out what that thing is, and then they put their little hook in it and they can drag you all around. So fix those things. If you're ashamed of your behavior, fix your behavior. If you're ashamed of an addiction, end the addiction. Get rid of anything in your life that can be used to manipulate you so that you're immune to that and it just bounces off you. And it's funny when they can't figure out what it is, because for men, if you're trying to shame a man, there's a cycle of things that you'll go through. It's some sort of emasculating shame, and then there will be you're not a real man shames, and it's kind of a cycle. And if someone runs through the whole cycle and you just kind of laugh it off because you're none of those things, there's a period of frustration, and then very often there's this awakening in their eyes. You can see it, and all of a sudden they start treating you better. Oh, he can't be manipulated? Well, the only way I can get what I need from him then is to be honest.
Yeah.
And most people aren't in our personal life. I don't mean on the industrial scale manipulation. That's usually malicious. In our personal life, they're not manipulating us maliciously. They don't hate us. They're not against us. They're desperate to get some of their needs met. And the only tool they know that has gotten their needs met in the past is manipulation. And it's been used on them, and maybe their parents used it on them. So they say, no, my parents did it, it's fine. And then they use it on other people and it works. So they're going to keep doing it because it worked. That's pretty good social reinforcement if something works. But it works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the relationship explodes.
That's what I get. Attachment theory is so important for
Mm-hmm.
me to understand as a frame for this entire thing, because if you have a secure attachment, then in relation to your children, they're hurt, they're crying, they're doing something, and you may focus on the behavior and shame them for the behavior, right? But you could also see the need. Ask
Mm-hmm.
them about the need, validate the emotion, validate their reality, because this is actually what they feel and what they're experiencing at this moment. And they may be dysregulated. And so where they're acting out because they need help from you to calm down their nervous system so that they don't actually go and punch the kid, because there's so much going on inside of them, they don't know what to do with the emotions that they have inside. And you tell them that there's nothing wrong with you because you have these emotions, there's nothing wrong with you because you feel this way. It's not okay to hit another person, so you set a boundary as well. And what you essentially teach them is that my reality is real, what I feel is real, my thoughts are valid, they're important, and I can understand what you say, obviously, but I don't need you to say a certain thing in order for me to feel validated, because I am secure in myself.
Yes.
So I will set a boundary against you and say, no, I know, thank you, but no, thank you, I'm fine.
Yeah.
So I think it also goes down to actually to our primary relationships that we have growing up.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
so a
Almost
lot of people,
everyone who manipulates was taught by one of their parents to manipulate. And
yeah,
almost everyone that is, my son, you could probably trick him because he's still 10 years old, but you can't directly manipulate him. And I've seen him catch people trying to manipulate him. And he's like, I don't know what's right or what's wrong here, but I know that what you're doing is trying to manipulate me. And he'll see that in advertisements, and he'll point out the particular form of manipulation that they're using. And so he's raised in such a way that he's never going to have to unlearn this. And what
Yeah.
I'm hoping is, the parents that buy this book, they raise their kids. I say in the book, the first thing you got to do is take it out of your parenting. Take all the manipulation out of your parenting
100%.
and start talking, speaking honestly to your children and directly. And once you take the manipulation out, you have to find better ways to communicate. It's kind of like, what do we do if we stop beating our kids? How do we get them to behave? Don't worry about that. Stop beating your kids. Then you'll figure it out. Out of necessity, you will figure it out. And I talk about persuasion being the substitute for manipulation, because manipulation is I win, you lose. And sometimes for the parents, they think the kid's winning, and they might in the short term, but long term, no. Persuasion is I win, you win. Ideal persuasion is I win, you win, and the spectators win too. The people that aren't directly involved win. As they call it, the external stakeholders.
Yeah.
We want to create that kind of relationship with our kids. Children who have a win-win relationship with their parents have nothing to rebel against when they become teenagers. Most of the time, they're rebelling against the manipulation that they suffered during their childhood. And they're saying, I'm kind of figuring out some of the stuff you told me were lies to get me to behave. And now I don't trust anything, and I'm going to punish you for it. And that's
I think
often
I
what
think
it is.
yeah, I agree with you there, but that's that's very good. But I think also when it comes to the teenage specifically, I think there's this term peer orientation, and the idea of peer orientation is that as your kids they go to school, like you said, they spend a lot of time with their peers. As a teenagers, they identify with a group. So
Mhm.
with that group, their peers, who are also emotionally and their nervous system is not mature enough, they identify with them, and so as kids, they protect their attachment to death, right? And so if they attach to their peers, which can happen, if especially if you don't have this good relationship with your kids as you're talking about, then your relationship with your children will become a threat against the attachment that they have with their peer group. So they're oriented towards the peers instead of being oriented towards you. And I think this is also a huge conversational topic one could talk about. But I agree with you that it comes down to the fact that if you don't have a good relationship or a good attachment, a secure attachment with your child, then certainly when they grow up and become teenagers, they will rebel because that attachment will replace the relationship that you have with your children.
And usually
And
what we find
yeah,
out if someone's been manipulating us for our own good, as they'll say, is that in the short term, we got some benefit from it. I manipulate my kids into eating healthy
yeah,
food by telling them if they're not, they're going to die or something like this. In the long term, then we create a bunch of other neuroses and issues that go along with it because we haven't told them the truth. So first of all, we've broken the trust. How much
yeah,
then did anything my dad tell me is true if that wasn't true, or my mom? And then the other is that uh, they may actually internalize some of the lies and not recognize their lies. And now they're operating in a world where some of their belief structure is counter to reality. And that's a huge problem because then you're making calculations on what to do and how to behave. And some of the numbers are wrong. And then all your calculations are wrong and you can't figure out what it is. I'm not stupid. Why can't I make this work? It's
yeah,
because you're doing the wrong set of calculations. And so when we tell our kids the truth, it's a little harder up front. How do you convince a child to eat healthy when the kid doesn't want to? So it's not that it can't be done, but you need to persuade them, and it's going to be a lot more work than saying eat that or you're getting a whipping, or eat that or I'm going to make you feel bad, which is what people
yeah.
normally do, the physical coercion or the manipulative coercion.
Consequences. Yeah.
Yeah.
Noah, was there anything that you had hoped to talk about that you didn't get to say or talk about in this conversation?
Yeah, I wanted to say a message to who's listening, and I wanted to let them know you're not broken. You're not crazy. You are undeveloped yet for the things that you have to face. And that's why you feel stressed. and anxious and stuck. And you need to talk to someone who can help you to develop the skill sets that you need and the mindset that you need in order to not feel stuck anymore. And this will allow you to bear the responsibility that makes life worthwhile. Don't wait. Get the help you need as soon as you can. And that's the biggest message that I have for people. It doesn't matter if you're coming to me for help or someone else. You know, I've spoken to you half an hour before we started the conversation, now for an hour, and I'm a very good judge of character. I'm sure you're extremely good at helping people. There are very few of us in the world. So if you're listening to this conversation, note the people who have these kind of conversations and who talk about it in this authentic way. Find one of them and get help. You'd be surprised how fast your life can turn around with even a single conversation can make a difference. And that's the real message I have to people is don't wait to get help. Go get it now.
Thank you so much, Noah. I'll definitely put your links also in the show notes so that people can find you on X and also on your website.
Thank you very much, Gabriel.
All right. I appreciate you so much and thank you again for
Thank
this
you.
conversation. It was lovely.